I'm Mackenzie Williams, 32, sitting at my parents' glossy mahogany table for our traditional Sunday dinner. My family has always seen me as the struggling middle child, the one who just couldn't find her path. Little do they know that behind my modest appearance lies a portfolio that would make their jaws drop. For 7 years, I've been silently building wealth while they continued their patronizing support. Tonight, Dad's about to announce they're cutting me off financially. If only they knew who's been quietly investing in their ventures all along. Before I tell you what happened next, where are you watching from? Hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories about standing up to family who underestimated you. The Williams family has always operated with a clear hierarchy. At the top sits my father, Gerald, now 60, a man who built his construction company from scratch through sheer determination and an unwavering belief that his way is always the right way. He's not a tycoon by any means, but in our suburban community, Williams Construction represents success: modest office building projects, upscale home developments, and the occasional municipal contract. His silver-streaked hair and perpetually tanned face have become his trademark at local business gatherings. My mother, Barbara, 58, orbits him like a dedicated satellite, managing the social calendar and maintaining appearances. She was a teacher before marrying Dad, but gave it up to become the perfect business wife. Her carefully highlighted blonde hair never shows roots, her nails are always manicured, and her conversation topics never stray into controversial territory. She's mastered the art of the gracious hostess while skillfully avoiding any real intimacy. Then there's my brother Scott, 35, Dad's pride and joy despite his mediocre business acumen. He joined the family business right after getting his business degree from the prestigious university Dad insisted he attend. Scott's been vice president of operations for 7 years, though everyone knows Dad still makes all the real decisions. Scott drives the right car, married the right woman, and lives in the right neighborhood, all according to the Gerald Williams playbook. My sister Allison, 29, took a different approved path. She married James Richardson, whose family owns a chain of luxury car dealerships across 3 states. She's now a stay-at-home mom to 2 perfectly dressed children who attend the most exclusive preschool in town. Her Instagram feed is a carefully curated display of domestic bliss and affluence. And then there's me, the middle child, always seen as responsible but unremarkable. I wasn't rebellious enough to be interesting, but wasn't compliant enough to be the favorite. I got good grades, not excellent ones. I was decent at sports, but never brought home championships. I existed in the middle ground of family attention. Mackenzie just doesn't have the drive. I once overheard Dad tell a business associate at a family barbecue when I was 16. That comment cut deeper than he knew, but instead of breaking me, it lit something inside. I chose State University instead of Dad's private college preference, partly because they offered me a partial scholarship, but mostly because I wanted something that was mine, not his. He made his disappointment clear by offering only partial support during those years, covering tuition but making me work for living expenses. It builds character, he'd say, though Scott never had to wait tables between classes. I worked at the campus financial aid office, which ironically gave me my first real education about money. I watched students from wealthy families waste resources while scholarship students pinched pennies. I began to understand money as a tool, not just a status symbol. During family gatherings, financial achievements were currency. Scott would announce a new contract for the company. Allison's husband would mention their new vacation property. My parents would beam with pride. When attention turned to me, my modest updates about classes or my part-time job were met with polite nods before conversation quickly shifted. The support from my family always came with strings attached. Dad paid for my first car, but selected it himself. Practical, nondescript, nothing that would turn heads. When I moved into my first apartment after college, Mom decorated it with furniture she chose, ignoring my preferences. Each gift was a subtle reminder that I couldn't be trusted to make these decisions myself. "We just want what's best for you, sweetie," was the refrain that accompanied every override of my choices. Family loans came with extensive questioning about my spending habits. Birthday checks arrived with suggestions for sensible purchases. Christmas gifts were often practical items Dad thought I needed rather than anything I'd expressed interest in. The pattern was clear. Money was Dad's language of control. He'd mastered the art of financial strings, and everyone in our family danced when he pulled them. Scott's house had been partially financed by Dad, which meant Dad had opinions about renovations. Allison's wedding had been paid for by our parents, which meant Mom had final say on everything from the venue to the flowers. I decided early on that whatever path I chose, it would be one where those strings couldn't reach me. I didn't have a plan yet, but I knew freedom would require financial independence. What I didn't know then was how good I would become at achieving it, or how sweet it would feel when the day came to reveal it. My first job after college wasn't impressive by William's family standards. While Scott was already driving a company car and Allison was planning her elaborate wedding to James, I took an entry-level position at Meridian Investments. The starting salary was modest, enough to rent a small apartment and make my student loan payments, but not enough to impress anyone at Sunday dinner. Administrative support staff, Dad repeated when I announced my new job, making it sound like I decided to become a professional dishwasher. Well, I suppose everyone needs to start somewhere. Though I did offer you a position at Williams Construction. What he'd actually offered was a receptionist role with the promise of seeing how things go, a far cry from the vice president title Scott had walked into. "I want to learn the financial sector," I explained. "Investment management interests me." "Investment requires capital," Dad replied with a patronizing smile. "Focus on saving enough for a reliable car first." What Dad didn't understand was that I wasn't just filing papers and answering phones at Meridian. I was observing, learning, absorbing everything I could about how money worked. 3 months into my job, I met Elaine Donovan, a senior investment advisor who became my life-changing mentor. It happened when I stayed late organizing client files and she found me reading through market analyses I'd pulled from the recycling bin. "Those are confidential, she said, startling me. I apologized profusely, expecting to be reprimanded or worse, but instead, she sat down across from me. "What did you think about the housing market projection on page 4? She asked, catching me completely off guard. I hesitated before admitting I thought their growth estimates were optimistic given the interest rate trends. Elaine smiled. "That's exactly what I told the client." She studied me for a moment. "You're Gerald Williams' daughter, aren't you?" "I met him at the Chamber of Commerce dinner last year." I nodded, preparing for the usual comments about Dad's business acumen or Scott's rising star. "Instead," she said, "would you be interested in learning more about investment strategy?" Real strategy, not just the basics. That conversation changed everything. Over the next 2 years, Elaine became my unofficial mentor. She recommended books, explained market trends, and eventually helped me set up my first investment account with my modest savings of $3,000. "Start small, be consistent, and most importantly, be patient," she advised. "And maybe don't tell everyone about what you're doing until you've got something substantial to show." I took her advice to heart, especially the last part. At family gatherings, I continued to be Mackenzie with a nice, stable job. When Dad or Mom asked about my career progress, I gave vague answers about learning a lot and gaining experience. They never pressed for details, assuming there was nothing impressive to share. Meanwhile, I was developing an investment philosophy that would serve me well. Unlike my father, who valued flashy, status symbol investments, I focused on value, growth potential, and calculated risk. I lived simply, well below my means, allowing me to invest an increasing percentage of my income. My first significant win came from a small tech startup that Elaine had insight on. I invested $2,000, a substantial portion of my savings at the time, and watched it triple in 18 months. Instead of cashing out entirely, I took back my initial investment plus a small profit and let the rest ride. By year 3 at Meridian, I had been promoted twice and was managing my own small client list while growing my personal portfolio steadily. I developed a specialization in identifying undervalued companies with strong fundamentals, businesses that weren't sexy enough for flashy investors but had solid growth potential. "You've got a gift for seeing value where others don't," Elaine told me during one of our regular coffee meetings. The irony wasn't lost on me. My own family couldn't see my value, yet I was building a career on recognizing underappreciated worth in the market. As my portfolio grew, so did the disconnect between my family's perception of me and my financial reality. At 28, when Scott was bragging about his new boat and Allison was showing photos of her family's luxury vacation, I had quietly accumulated a portfolio worth over $300,000. "Mackenzie, have you thought about going back for an MBA?" Dad asked during one Sunday dinner. "It might help you move up from that desk job." I smiled and said I was considering it, not mentioning that I was already taking night classes, not for an MBA, but for specialized certifications in investment analysis that were directly growing my expertise and my wealth. The pressure to get a real career or marry well continued at every family gathering. Mom regularly tried to set me up with the sons of her friends, always men with promising futures in established fields. "James has a cousin who's a dentist," Allison offered once. "He's divorced, but has a lovely practice. Should I arrange a meeting?" The internal conflict grew stronger as my success did. Part of me wanted to show them my portfolio statements, to see the shock on their faces when they realized I wasn't the struggling middle child they pitied. But another part recognized the power in being underestimated. There was freedom in their low expectations. By my 30th birthday, I had made several investments that paid off exceptionally well. A commercial real estate opportunity that Elaine connected me with doubled my money in 14 months. A calculated risk on a healthcare technology company yielded a 400% return when they were acquired by a larger firm. I moved to a nicer apartment, but told my family it was a good deal I found, letting them assume I was still barely making ends meet. I drove the same practical car I'd had for years, invested in quality clothing that would last rather than flashy labels, and continued living my quietly prosperous life. The growing frustration came not from their misconceptions, but from the wasted relationship potential. I couldn't share my true passions or successes with my own family. Our conversations remained superficial because the truth of my life remained hidden. I never planned a grand revelation. I thought perhaps one day, when I reached some significant milestone, I might casually mention my success. But as my net worth approached 7 figures before my 32nd birthday, that milestone seemed to keep moving further away. It wasn't pride or fear holding me back anymore. It was the realization that my achievement might never be enough for Gerald Williams to see me as an equal. And until I made peace with that, no number in my portfolio would fill that gap. The invitation came via my mother's usual text message, "Sunday dinner at 5. Dad wants to discuss something important with everyone. Please be prompt." Nothing unusual in the wording, but something in it triggered my intuition. After years of navigating family dynamics, I'd developed a sixth sense for when a Williams family gathering was going to be more than just a meal. I called my best friend Rachel that evening. Unlike my family, Rachel knew everything about my financial situation. We'd been friends since college, and she'd witnessed my journey from entry-level employee to successful investor. "Do you think they found out?" she asked after I read her the text. "No way," I replied, stretching out on my couch, a mid-century piece I'd splurged on but told my mother was a lucky thrift store find. Dad would have already called to either lecture me about risk or ask for investment tips, depending on how impressed he was. "Maybe Scott is getting another promotion," Rachel suggested. Scott's promotions within the family business were always treated like royal coronations. Possibly. Or Allison is pregnant again. I sighed. Whatever it is, I'm sure I'll play my usual role as audience member rather than participant. One day you're going to have to tell them, Mac. It's been what? 7 years of them thinking you're just getting by. 7 years of peace, I corrected her. 7 years of making my own decisions without their input. But after hanging up, I replayed memories of previous, important family discussions. There was the dinner where Dad announced he was providing the down payment for Scott's house because he's taking on real responsibility at the company. The Easter brunch where he presented Allison with startup capital for a boutique she wanted to open but abandoned 3 months later. Each family milestone seemed to revolve around Dad's financial benevolence. Throughout the week, the dinner loomed in my thoughts. I found myself distracted during client meetings, wondering what new family dynamic would emerge on Sunday. On Thursday, I had lunch with Elaine, who had recently retired from Meridian but remained my mentor and friend. You seem preoccupied, she noted as we sat at our favorite cafe. I explained about the upcoming dinner and my concerns. You know, she said thoughtfully, I've always respected your decision to keep your success private. But I wonder if it's still serving you, or if it's become its own kind of prison. It's not about hiding, I insisted. It's about boundaries. Is it? Or is part of you still looking for validation from your father? Her directness was why I valued her advice even when it was uncomfortable. The truly independent move might be allowing them to see your success and not caring how they react. That conversation stayed with me as Sunday approached. I spent Saturday morning reviewing my portfolio, now diversified across technology startups, real estate holdings, established dividend stocks, and several venture capital funds. My net worth had reached $1.7 million, not a fortune by Wall Street standards, but remarkable for someone my age who had started with almost nothing. As I scrolled through my investment management app, I noticed something that made me stop short. Among my holdings was a significant stake in a regional development fund that, according to the quarterly report, had recently increased its position in Williams Construction. A quick analysis confirmed it. Through this fund, I had become an indirect investor in my father's business. Further research revealed that the fund had also invested in the auto dealership chain owned by my brother-in-law's family and a commercial property development where Scott had recently secured a major contract. I sat back, stunned by the irony. Without even knowing it, I had become a silent supporter of my family's ventures. The independence I'd been so proud of had a hidden connection to the very people I'd been trying to prove myself separate from. That night, I debated what to wear to dinner. My closet contained several designer items I could easily afford, but typically saved for client meetings. For family gatherings, I usually chose more modest options to maintain my cover. After trying on and discarding several outfits, I settled on dark jeans, a simple blouse, and a cardigan, comfortable, appropriate, and unremarkable. The perfect disguise for someone hiding in plain sight. As I was preparing to leave on Sunday afternoon, I made an impulsive decision. I spent 15 minutes organizing my financial information on my phone, creating clear, simple visuals of my portfolio, investment growth, and net worth. I didn't plan to share them, but having them ready gave me a strange sense of security. The drive to my parents' house in their exclusive gated community took 30 minutes. With each mile, I could feel my professional confidence receding and my old family role settling over me like an ill-fitting coat. By the time I pulled into their circular driveway, parked between Scott's luxury SUV and Allison's imported sedan, I was already bracing myself for an evening of subtle diminishment. Just get through dinner, I told my reflection in the rearview mirror. Nothing has changed. But as I walked toward their imposing front door, I couldn't shake Elaine's words or the knowledge that, in a way I never anticipated, my financial life was already intertwined with my family's. Something had changed, even if they didn't know it yet. My parents' house always struck me as trying too hard, a McMansion with Tuscan pretensions nestled in a neighborhood of similar homes. The massive double doors, the fountain in the center of the circular driveway, the precisely trimmed hedges, all screamed, "We've made it," in a way that felt somewhat desperate to my more understated tastes. Mom answered the door in her Sunday best, a St. John knit suit and pearls, as if we were dining at the country club rather than their formal dining room. "Mackenzie, darling," she air-kissed near my cheeks. "Everyone's already here. You look comfortable." The slight pause spoke volumes. The entryway opened to their great room where Scott stood by the built-in bar fixing drinks. His wife Jessica sat on the sofa next to Allison, who was showing off photos of her children on her phone. Their husbands, James and Todd, were engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation near the fireplace. Dad observed it all from his leather recliner like a king surveying his court. "There she is," Dad announced as I entered. "Scotch, Mackenzie? Or are you still drinking that cheap white wine?" "Just water for now, thanks," I replied, noticing how he managed to turn even a drink preference into a subtle dig. Scott handed me a water with lemon. "How's the desk job? Still pushing papers for the money guys?" "Something like that," I answered with the practiced smile I'd perfected for these gatherings. The pre-dinner small talk followed its usual pattern. Scott detailed his latest negotiation for the business, apparently saving thousands on a concrete contract. Allison updated everyone on 5-year-old Emma's progress in her private French immersion classes and 3-year-old Noah's swimming lessons. "What about you, Mackenzie? Anything new?" Mom asked in that perfunctory way that suggested she was just being polite. "Work is going well," I offered my standard response. "I'm enjoying my clients and learning a lot." "Still at that same place?" "Meridian?" Dad asked, though he knew perfectly well where I worked. "Yes, still there." "Loyalty is admirable," he said with the faintest hint of condescension. "Though advancement often requires strategic moves." Before I could respond, Mom announced dinner was ready. We moved to the formal dining room with its oversized chandelier and mahogany table that could seat 12. Mom had gone all out with the good china, crystal glasses, and elaborate centerpiece, another sign that this wasn't just a regular Sunday dinner. The first hint of what was coming appeared during the appetizer course, Dad's favorite shrimp cocktail. "Scott tells me the new development project is proceeding ahead of schedule," Dad said, beaming at my brother. "The Robinson contract could be our biggest yet." "We're projecting a 15% profit margin," Scott replied, clearly having rehearsed this exchange. "I've already started talks with the Westlake Group about their office complex." "That's my boy," Dad nodded approvingly. "Thinking ahead. Building relationships." Mom served her famous roast beef for the main course, and the family business discussion continued, with occasional interjections from Allison about her charity committee work. I ate quietly, waiting for whatever announcement was coming. It arrived with the dessert, Mom's apple pie a la mode. Dad tapped his water glass with his spoon, commanding attention. "I've asked you all here today because I've made some decisions about the family's financial future." He paused dramatically. "As you know, your mother and I have always believed in supporting our children. We've helped each of you in different ways." Scott nodded solemnly. Allison smiled. I maintained a neutral expression. "However," Dad continued, "there comes a time when support must transition to independence. Scott has proven himself at Williams Construction. Allison has made a wonderful life with James. And Mackenzie." He turned to me. "Well, you've been finding your way." I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, the sensation that always preceded one of Dad's backhanded compliments. "I've decided," he announced, looking directly at me, "that it's time to formalize the financial boundaries within this family. Scott will continue as executive vice president with the compensation package we've discussed. Allison and James have their situation well in hand. And Mackenzie, you're cut off." The room fell silent except for the faint clink of Jessica's fork against her dessert plate. "No more support from this family," Dad continued proudly, as if he were doing me a favor. "It's time you learned to stand on your own 2 feet. The occasional help with rent, the holiday checks, the family cell phone plan, all of it ends today." I blinked, processing his words. The occasional help he referred to amounted to perhaps $2,000 a year, Christmas and birthday checks I typically donated to charity, and a cell phone plan I'd offered to leave multiple times, but Mom had insisted was no trouble to keep you on. Before I could respond, Mom jumped in with her practice supportive wife routine. "We think this will be good for you, sweetie. Sometimes the best motivation comes from necessity. I could help you find something more substantial," Scott offered, puffing up with self-importance. "Entry-level project management at Williams Construction pays better than what you're making shuffling paperwork." Or, Allison added with false brightness, "We're looking for someone to help with the children 3 days a week. The nanny agency charges fortune, but we could work something out. Family rate." The room swirled with their assumptions, that I needed their help, that I couldn't support myself, that after 7 years in finance I was still just treading water. "You're awfully quiet, Mackenzie," Dad noted, clearly expecting either gratitude for his tough love or perhaps some tears. I took a slow sip of water, buying myself a moment. 7 years of holding back, of nodding and smiling through their condescension, of maintaining my cover, all of it converged into this moment of perfect clarity. "I appreciate your concern," I said finally, my voice steadier than I expected. "But I'm curious, how much support do you think you've been providing me?" Dad frowned slightly, not expecting this question. "Well, there's the checks, the phone plan. We helped with the security deposit on your apartment 2 years ago. That totals about $2,400 per year," I calculated aloud. "Less than 1% of my annual income." A confused silence fell over the table. "Your job pays that well?" Scott asked incredulously. "For administrative work. I haven't been in an administrative role for 5 years, I replied, pulling out my phone. "I'm a senior investment manager with my own client portfolio." "Well, that's wonderful," Mom stuttered, clearly recalibrating. "You should have told us you got promoted." "I've told you several times," I said. "But that's not really the point." I opened my investment app and pulled up the summary page I'd prepared earlier. With one calm motion, I placed my phone in the center of the table, screen up. "This is my current net worth," I said simply. The number glowed on the screen, $1,712,495.86. Dad grabbed the phone first, his expression shifting from dismissal to disbelief. "What am I looking at? Is this some kind of joke?" "No joke," I replied. "That's my investment portfolio, retirement accounts, and cash positions as of market close Friday." Scott snatched the phone from Dad, staring at the screen with narrowed eyes. "This can't be right. This would make you more financially successful than anyone at this table under 40? I supplied. "Yes." Allison's perfectly maintained composure cracked as she reached for the phone. "How is this possible? You drive a 5-year-old Honda and live in that little apartment downtown." "I prioritize investments over appearances," I explained, watching her scroll through the detailed breakdown of my portfolio with widening eyes. "I've averaged a 22% annual return since I started investing seriously." But we thought," Mom stammered. "You thought I was struggling," I finished for her. "You've thought that for years despite everything I've told you about my career. You chose to see what you expected to see." Dad had recovered enough to demand proof. "Anyone can make a fancy spreadsheet. These numbers mean nothing without documentation." I calmly took back my phone, opened my brokerage account app, and handed it back to him. "Feel free to explore. All the transaction histories, account statements, and growth charts are there." As he scrolled with increasing agitation, I continued. "What might interest you most is page 3, my holdings in the Northeastern Regional Development Fund." His finger froze on the screen. "This fund, it's invested in Williams Construction." "Yes," I confirmed. "Through that fund, I own approximately 15% of your company's outstanding shares. I'm also indirectly invested in James's family business and the Westlake office complex Scott mentioned earlier." The dining room erupted into chaos. Scott demanded to know how long I'd been secretly spying on the family business. Allison vacillated between shocked respect and thinly veiled jealousy. Mom kept repeating that she had no idea while looking at Dad as if waiting for his cue on how to react. Dad's face had gone through a fascinating transformation, from dismissive to disbelieving to angry to a strange mix of confusion and something that might, on anyone else, have resembled respect. "Why keep this secret?" he finally asked, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. "Why let us think you were barely getting by?" I met his gaze steadily. "Because every achievement in this family has always come with your approval attached to it. I wanted to succeed or fail on my own terms, without your influence or control." "We've only ever wanted to help," Mom protested weakly. "No," I corrected gently. "You've wanted to direct. There's a difference." For once, the Williams family dining room was silent, not because the children were listening to Dad, but because Dad was, finally, listening to me. The silence lasted only moments before everyone started talking at once. Mom kept looking between Dad and me as if trying to figure out whose reaction she should mirror. Scott had moved from disbelief to defensiveness, while Allison was rapidly recalculating her perception of her struggling sister. "Let me see that again," Dad demanded, reaching for my phone. I handed it over, watching as he scrutinized the portfolio with narrowed eyes. "These tech investments, the timing is impeccable," he muttered, almost to himself. "And these real estate holdings, how did you know to get into the Riverside development before the city announced the revitalization project?" "Research, analysis, and some calculated risk," I explained. "Plus mentorship from people who recognize potential." "And what exactly do you do at Meridian now?" Scott interrupted, his tone suggesting he still didn't quite believe me. "I manage a $120 million portfolio for high-net-worth clients, specializing in growth strategy for first-generation wealth builders," I replied. "I was promoted to senior investment manager last year." "But you never said anything," Mom interjected, sounding hurt. "All those times we offered to help with expenses." "I told you I was doing fine," I reminded her gently. "You chose to interpret that as me being too proud to admit struggling. Why the secrecy about your success?" Dad pressed, still scrutinizing my investment breakdown. "Most people would want to celebrate achievements like these. Most people don't have families where financial worth determines personal worth," I replied, surprising myself with my candor. "I needed to know I could do this without your approval, connections, or safety net." Dad's expression hardened slightly. "So this was about proving something?" "No," I shook my head. "It was about becoming someone, on my own terms." "I still don't understand how you've managed this," Scott said, gesturing at the phone Dad was still holding. "Even with a good job, these returns are extraordinary." "I live well below my means," I explained. "When I got my first bonus at Meridian, I invested most of it instead of upgrading my lifestyle. Same with every raise and promotion since. But your apartment, your car." Allison trailed off, clearly recalibrating her understanding of my choices. "Are perfectly adequate and leave me with more capital to invest," I finished for her. "My Honda is reliable and paid off. My apartment is in an excellent location and has everything I need." "But you could afford so much more," she pressed, genuinely puzzled. "That's the point, Allison. I choose what matters to me, not what impresses others." Dad had been unusually quiet, still scrolling through my financial data. "This blind fund that invested in Williams Construction. Did you know about our company's inclusion when you bought in?" "No," I admitted. "That was coincidental. I invested based on the fund's overall performance and management strategy. I only discovered the connection last night." "So you've been what, secretly watching our business performance through your financial lens?" Scott asked accusingly. "I've barely thought about it," I replied honestly. "My investment strategy has nothing to do with this family." 15%, Dad murmured, still fixated on my stake in his company. "That would make you one of our largest non-family investors." "Technically, I am family," I reminded him with a small smile. "Jessica, who had been silent throughout this revelation, finally spoke up. I think what Mackenzie has accomplished is incredible. Building this kind of portfolio before 35 is remarkable by any standard. Scott shot his wife a betrayed look, but she continued, I worked in banking before we had the kids, remember? I understand what these numbers represent. It's impressive, period. Thank you, Jessica, I said, genuinely appreciative of her support. So what now? Mom asked, looking confused about how this new information changed the family dynamic. Do you plan to get involved in the family business after all? No, I said firmly. My career at Meridian is fulfilling and successful. My investments in the fund that includes Williams Construction will remain just that, passive investments based on overall fund performance. But with your financial acumen, you could bring valuable perspective to our operation, Dad suggested, and I recognized his shift to business mode. He was already thinking about how to leverage my unexpected success for his benefit. I'm not interested in joining Williams Construction, I reiterated. That's Scott's domain, and I have my own. But surely now you'll consider moving to a nicer place, getting a better car? Allison pressed, still struggling to understand my choices. Maybe eventually, if I want to. But those decisions will be based on my preferences, not external expectations. Dad finally set my phone down and leaned back in his chair, studying me with new eyes. All this time, we thought you were the one who needed guidance, who couldn't find her footing. Which says more about your perception than my reality, I pointed out. You've really built all this yourself? He asked, and I detected a note of something unfamiliar in his voice. Was it actually respect? Yes, I stated simply. Every dollar invested, every decision made, every risk calculated. It was all me, with guidance from mentors I sought out myself. Why show us now? Scott asked. You could have kept this to yourself. I looked at my brother, seeing beyond his defensiveness to the genuine confusion underneath. Because Dad just made a grand announcement about cutting me off financially, as if that would devastate me. The irony was too perfect to ignore. A tense silence fell over the table as everyone processed this new reality. The family mythology had been built around Dad as the provider, the successful one, with his children following prescribed paths of varying success. My revelation had disrupted that narrative completely. I think this calls for champagne, Dad finally announced, pushing back from the table. Apparently, we have something to celebrate after all. As he headed toward the wine refrigerator, I noticed his shoulders weren't quite as squared as usual. The certainty in his step had diminished slightly. For perhaps the first time in my memory, Gerald Williams was adjusting to a family development he hadn't orchestrated. Mom followed him with her eyes, then turned to me with a bewildered expression. All these years, you've been... What? Pretending to be less successful than you are. I don't understand why anyone would do that. I wasn't pretending anything, I clarified. I was simply living according to my values while you all projected your assumptions onto me. Dad returned with an expensive bottle of champagne and began filling glasses. To Mackenzie, he proposed, raising his glass with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The dark horse of the Williams family. We all raised our glasses, but as I sipped the bubbly liquid, I recognized this for what it was, not a genuine celebration of my success, but Dad's attempt to re-establish control by positioning himself as the proud father who had somehow contributed to my achievement. The power dynamic had shifted, but the family patterns were already working to reassert themselves. The question was whether I would allow them to. As the champagne flowed, I watched my family recalibrating in real time. Dad had moved from shock to a strategic embrace of my success, attempting to position himself as having somehow fostered my independent spirit all along. I always knew Mackenzie had potential, he told Scott with revisionist confidence. She just needed to find her own path. Scott nodded uncertainly, still processing that his supposedly struggling sister had a net worth that rivaled his own, without the family business advantage he'd enjoyed. I could see him mentally reviewing our past interactions, recasting them in light of this new information. So, all those times you asked for book recommendations about investing. He began. I was being polite. I finished for him. Those were generally books I'd read years before. He winced slightly. And when I offered to explain the basics of the stock market at Christmas 2 years ago, I was already managing a $40 million client portfolio, I confirmed gently. Mom had transitioned to her social damage control mode, the one she employed when family realities threatened her carefully maintained image. We always knew you were smart with money, dear, she insisted, patting my hand. Remember how proud we were when you opened your first savings account in high school? The one Dad said would teach me the value of money because my allowance was being cut in half? I reminded her. She flushed slightly. Well, it obviously worked. Look at you now. Allison had shifted from shock to a strange sort of competitive alignment. We should talk about investment strategies for the children's college funds, she suggested, suddenly treating me as a potential resource rather than the family underachiever. James has been working with his family's financial advisor, but I'd love your perspective. I'm happy to discuss it sometime, I offered, recognizing her attempt to establish a new connection based on my newly revealed value. James, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. Did you know about the Richardson dealerships in your portfolio? That's my family's business. As I mentioned earlier, those investments are through funds. I wasn't aware of the specific connection until recently, I explained. Fascinating coincidence, Dad interjected, refilling his champagne glass. Almost as if Mackenzie has been secretly keeping tabs on all our ventures. The accusation was subtle but clear. Or, I countered calmly, it demonstrates that I independently identified the same quality investments that attracted other professional fund managers. Perhaps we have more in common than you thought, Dad. He considered this, then nodded slowly. Perhaps we do. He leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. You know, Williams Construction is considering expansion into the commercial real estate management sector. With your expertise and my connections. I'm not interested in joining the family business, I reiterated firmly. My career path is established and fulfilling. But surely now that we understand your capabilities, you'd reconsider taking a role more suited to your talents, he pressed. The Williams name carries weight in this community. Combined with your financial acumen. Dad, I interrupted gently, my success isn't an invitation for a business partnership. It's simply a correction to a misconception you've held about me for years. His expression hardened slightly. Is that what tonight was about? Proving us wrong. No, I shook my head. It was about honesty. About finally being seen for who I actually am, not who you assumed I was. Well, we certainly see you differently now, Scott muttered, still processing his diminished position in the family hierarchy. Mom, ever sensitive to tension, quickly changed the subject. Will you be buying a house now, dear? There's a lovely property just 3 doors down from us that's coming on the market. We could be neighbors. The suggestion was so perfectly tone-deaf that I almost laughed. I'm happy where I am for now, Mom. When I decide to move, I'll choose a place that suits my needs and preferences. But with your means, you could live anywhere, she persisted. Why stay in that downtown apartment? Because I value walkability, proximity to work, and low maintenance more than square footage or status, I explained. My housing choices reflect my priorities, not my limitations. This concept seemed genuinely difficult for her to grasp. Dad, meanwhile, had shifted to bargaining mode. If you won't consider joining Williams Construction, perhaps you'd at least consult on our investment strategy? As a paid advisor, of course. Your insights could be valuable. It was the closest thing to professional respect he'd ever offered me, yet I could see it for what it was, another attempt to establish control, to bring my independent success under the family umbrella. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but there would be potential conflicts with my role at Meridian. My professional ethics are important to me. More important than family, he challenged. Ethics and family aren't mutually exclusive, Dad. In fact, they should align. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table as the implications of my statement sank in. You know, Scott said suddenly, I've been thinking about diversifying my personal investments beyond just the family business. Would you have any recommendations? The question was awkward but sincere, perhaps the first genuine connection Scott had attempted with me in years. I'd be happy to suggest some resources, I offered. Though I can't provide specific investment advice outside my professional role. I understand, he nodded, a new respect in his eyes. As the evening progressed, the conversation kept returning to my financial success, with family members alternating between trying to claim partial credit for it and attempting to benefit from it. Mom suggested I might want to upgrade my wardrobe now that I could afford designer labels. Allison hinted that I could contribute more generously to her children's birthday gifts. Dad continued, making thinly veiled suggestions about family business opportunities. After an hour of this, I decided it was time to go. The revelation had accomplished what it needed to, the truth was out, but the family dynamics were still attempting to reassert themselves in new forms. I should head home, I announced, standing up. I have an early client meeting tomorrow, but we've barely had time to process all this, Mom protested. There's so much more to discuss. And we will, I assured her, but not all tonight. This is a lot for everyone to take in. Dad stood as well, his expression complex. You've certainly given us something to think about, Mackenzie. I won't pretend I'm not surprised and impressed by what you've accomplished. Thank you, I replied simply. Perhaps we could have lunch this week, he suggested. Just the two of us. I'd like to hear more about your investment philosophy. I recognized the olive branch for what it was, not quite an apology for years of underestimation, but an acknowledgement of my worth on terms he understood. I'd like that, I agreed, surprising myself with the sincerity of my response. As I gathered my things to leave, each family member approached me differently than they had when I arrived. Scott asked if we could grab coffee soon. Allison hugged me with genuine warmth rather than her usual performative affection. Mom fussed about sending me home with leftovers as if nothing had changed, though her eyes held new questions. Dad walked me to the door, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder. You know, you could have told us sooner. Would you have believed me without proof? I asked gently. He considered this, then sighed. Probably not. We all get locked into how we see each other, don't we? We do, I agreed. But that can change if we let it. As I drove away from my parents' house, I felt lighter than I had in years. The secret that had initially protected my independence had eventually become its own kind of constraint. Now that it was revealed, new possibilities for authentic family relationships could begin, not based on financial support or control, but on mutual respect and understanding. Whether those possibilities would become reality remained to be seen, but for the first time in my adult life, I was driving away from a family dinner feeling hopeful rather than diminished. The leverage had shifted, but more importantly, so had the truth between us. The 2 weeks following that Sunday dinner brought more change to my family relationships than the previous decade combined. The revelation of my financial success had shattered the family's perception of me, leaving everyone, including myself, navigating unfamiliar territory. So, how does it feel to be the family rock star? Rachel asked over coffee the Tuesday after the dinner. We were at our favorite cafe, the morning sun streaming through the windows as I recounted every detail of the confrontation. Surreal, I admitted, wrapping my hands around my mug. It's like they're all seeing me for the first time, but they're still looking through their own filters. What do you mean? Dad sees me as a potential business asset now. Mom's proud but confused about why I don't flaunt my wealth. Scott's recalibrating his big brother superiority complex. And Allison suddenly wants to be best friends. Rachel laughed. So, basically, they're still being themselves, just with updated information. Exactly. I stirred my coffee thoughtfully. The question is whether real change is possible or if we're just reshuffling the same dynamics. What do you want to happen? She asked. I considered this carefully. I want relationships based on who we actually are, not family mythology or financial positioning. I want authentic connection without the power games. That's asking a lot from the Williams family, Rachel observed gently. I know, I sighed. But hiding my success was exhausting in its own way. At least now we're dealing with reality, even if it's complicated. The most surprising development came from my father. True to his word, he invited me to lunch that Friday at his club, a gesture of inclusion that hadn't been extended before. As we sat in the wood-paneled dining room surrounded by the city's business elite, I noticed subtle differences in how he introduced me to his associates. This is my daughter Mackenzie, senior investment manager at Meridian, he said to his golf partner, with genuine pride in his voice. Not my youngest daughter or Mackenzie, who works downtown, acknowledging my professional identity directly. Over our meal, he asked thoughtful questions about my investment philosophy, listening with uncharacteristic attention to my explanations of risk assessment and growth strategies. You know, he said after a while, I've spent years assuming you needed guidance when you were building something remarkable right under our noses. It wasn't intentionally secretive at first, I explained. I just needed space to succeed or fail on my own terms, without family expectations shaping every decision. He nodded slowly. I understand that better than you might think. My father wanted me to take over his hardware store. Building Williams Construction was my rebellion. It was the first time he'd ever drawn a parallel between our paths rather than emphasizing our differences. A small connection, but significant. The difference, I pointed out gently, is that once you succeeded, you expected your children to follow your blueprint. His expression tightened briefly, then relaxed into rueful acknowledgement. Fair point. Success can make us rigid in our thinking. We weren't magically transformed into best friends, but something had shifted, a mutual respect that hadn't existed before. My mother's adjustment proved more challenging. She called almost daily that first week, each conversation circling around her confusion about my lifestyle choices. I just don't understand why you're still driving that old car, she said during one call. You could afford a Mercedes like Allison's. I don't want a Mercedes, Mom. My car is reliable, paid for, and meets my needs. But people will think you can't afford better, she fretted. I don't make decisions based on what strangers might think about my financial situation, I explained patiently. Well, at least let me help you redecorate your apartment. Now that we know you can afford quality furniture. Mom, I interrupted gently. My furniture is quality. I chose each piece carefully. The fact that I can afford more expensive items doesn't mean I need or want them. Her silence spoke volumes about the gap in our values. For Mom, wealth was meant to be displayed. My choice to live below my means was incomprehensible to her framework. I just want you to have nice things, she finally said in a small voice. I know, I acknowledged. But we have different definitions of nice. Mine is based on what brings me joy and value, not what impresses others. It was a conversation we would have many times, with incremental progress. Mom was trying to connect through the language she understood, material comfort and social status, while I was asking her to see beyond those metrics to the person I actually was. Scott's reaction surprised me most. A week after the dinner, he texted asking if I'd meet him for lunch near my office. I've been doing some thinking, he said as we sat at a quiet table in the corner of a downtown bistro. About how I've treated you all these years. I waited, curious where this was going. I assumed because you didn't follow Dad's path, or my path, that you were less successful, he continued. I was condescending, and I'm sorry. The apology was unexpected and seemed genuine. Thank you for saying that, I replied. It means a lot. I also realized something else, he added, looking uncomfortable. I don't actually enjoy working at Williams Construction that much. I just never questioned whether it was what I wanted. This revelation felt more intimate than any conversation we'd had as adults. What would you want to do if you had complete freedom to choose? I asked. He looked surprised by the question, then thoughtful. I've always been interested in sustainable building materials. There's so much innovation happening in that field, but Dad thinks it's too experimental for our clients. We spent the next hour discussing his genuine interests and how he might explore them, even within the constraints of the family business. For perhaps the first time, we connected as equals with mutual respect rather than as siblings jockeying for position in the family hierarchy. Allison's shift was more transparent. She invited me to girls' lunches and texted links to designer sales, clearly hoping to tap into both my financial acumen and my previously hidden resources. But beneath the somewhat calculating overtures, I sensed a genuine reassessment. "I always thought you were settling," she admitted during one of our get-togethers. "Living downtown, focusing on career instead of family. I felt sorry for you." "And now?" I prompted. "Now I realize you were building something impressive while making deliberate choices, not settling at all." She hesitated. "It makes me wonder about some of my choices, honestly." "How so?" "I followed the path that was expected. Marry well, beautiful home, children, charity committees. It's a good life," she hastened to add, "but sometimes I wonder who I'd be if I'd defined success for myself, like you did." These moments of authentic connection were interspersed with old patterns trying to reassert themselves. Dad would occasionally slip into offering unsolicited financial advice, forgetting that investment was literally my profession. Mom still made comments about my appearance or lifestyle that revealed her unchanged value system. Family gatherings still had undercurrents of comparison and positioning. But something fundamental had changed. The revelation of my financial success had created space for more honest conversations and gradually shifting perceptions. The family mythology that had locked each of us into prescribed roles had been disrupted, allowing new possibilities to emerge. 3 months after that fateful Sunday dinner, I closed on a modest but beautiful condo in a historic downtown building, a deliberate choice that reflected my values of quality, location, and investment potential. I invited my family for a small housewarming gathering, nervous but hopeful about hosting them on my terms. As they explored my new home with its carefully chosen furnishings and spectacular city views, I watched their reactions with interest. Mom still suggested additional decorative touches, but also complimented my unique style. Dad noted the building's appreciation potential with genuine approval. Scott asked thoughtful questions about the renovation process. Allison admired the kitchen without suggesting how I should have designed it differently. Small steps, but meaningful ones. Later, as we enjoyed drinks on my terrace overlooking the city lights, Dad raised his glass in a toast. "To Mackenzie," he said, "who taught us all that success has many definitions, and the quietest path sometimes leads to the most impressive destination." It wasn't a perfect resolution to years of misunderstanding and underestimation. Real healing would take time, consistent boundaries, and continued honest communication. Some family patterns were too ingrained to disappear completely. But as I looked around at my family, seeing me more clearly than ever before and making halting efforts to connect authentically, I felt profound gratitude for the journey. The financial independence I'd built had ultimately led to something even more valuable. The freedom to be truly seen and accepted for who I was, not who others expected me to be. That Sunday dinner confrontation had been both an ending and a beginning, the end of hiding my success, and the beginning of more authentic family relationships. The path forward wouldn't be perfectly smooth, but it would be real, and that made all the difference. So, what's your story? Have you ever been underestimated by family or friends, only to prove them wrong in your own way? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that success is personal, independence is powerful, and standing in your truth can transform relationships. Thank you for being part of this journey, and remember, your worth isn't determined by others' perceptions, but by the authentic life you build for yourself.